Iran in panic. 3,000 U.S. Marines and dozens of V-22 Ospreys head to the Middle East. That headline is built to spike your adrenaline. It's got big numbers, a scary aircraft name, and one of the most emotionally addictive phrases in geopolitics: panic. But here's the first thing you need to understand, right away, before your feed drags you into a doom spiral. Most panic headlines are not reporting, they're packaging. They take a real movement, a real posture shift, a real deployment decision, and they wrap it in a movie trailer voice so you'll feel like the next scene is inevitable. So in this video, I'm going to give you 3 things, immediately, so you know exactly what you're getting. 1. What credible reporting actually says about Marines and warships moving toward the Middle East. 2. What 3,000 Marines and dozens of Ospreys likely means in practice, and where it's probably exaggerated. 3. The signals you can watch to tell whether this is routine force posture in a dangerous environment or the start of a new phase. And I'll give you the mini payoff up front so you're not waiting for the point. A deployment can be serious without being a countdown. Most of the time it's a pressure move, readiness, deterrence, and options, built to manage risk, not to promise an ending. Now let's separate the story from the soundtrack, because this is where people get played. The soundtrack says, Iran is panicking. But panic is a vibe word. It's not a verified condition. It's a label used to make you interpret everything as victory or collapse. The real story is about posture, capabilities, and incentives. And the fastest way to understand it is to ask one question that works on every military headline. Is this about intent, or is this about readiness? Intent is what leaders want to do. Readiness is what militaries do, so they're not surprised by what someone else does. A lot of headlines pretend readiness equals intent. That's how you get manipulated. So what do we actually know from reputable reporting? We have credible reporting that the Pentagon is moving additional warships and a Marine expeditionary unit toward the Middle East in response to the regional escalation and threats to the Strait of Hormuz. And this is important. A Marine expeditionary unit isn't 3,000 guys with rifles. It's a combined force package, Marines plus sailors plus ships plus aircraft, built to do multiple things: crisis response, evacuation support, raids, security reinforcement, and rapid options short of full-scale war. Recent reporting has described the Pentagon sending an amphibious ready group and a Marine expeditionary unit, with the USS Tripoli cited as moving toward the region and the force size described as roughly 5,000 Marines and sailors combined, not just Marines alone. That's a real move. That's not a thumbnail. That's a real posture adjustment in a volatile environment. Now, where does 3,000 Marines come from? A lot of headlines grab a clean number because it's easier to remember, easier to share, and easier to dramatize. But the typical force associated with these amphibious packages isn't always one neat, consistent number, and some reporting is careful to clarify who is included in the count. So if you see 3,000 Marines, treat it as an approximation or a partial slice of a larger deployed unit, unless a credible outlet specifically confirms that exact count. Now, the second part of the headline is doing even more psychological work. Dozens of V-22 Ospreys. Because if you say Ospreys, people imagine a sky full of tiltrotors pouring into a war zone like it's a Hollywood scene. Here's what's true and what's likely being exaggerated. It is normal for a Marine expeditionary unit to have aviation elements. It is normal for a MEU to include tiltrotor aircraft like the MV-22, because that's part of how Marines move quickly over distance from ships. So, the presence of Ospreys in the ecosystem of an amphibious group is not shocking. What's questionable is the confident phrase dozens being presented as if it's a confirmed count, as if a specific number of aircraft has been publicly verified, and as if those aircraft are all headed to one place for one dramatic reason. That's the difference between plausible composition and verified detail. And you have to respect that difference because war content is full of numbers that are technically plausible but not actually confirmed. Now let's make this practical. Why do deployments like this happen? 3 reasons: deterrence, defense, and options. Deterrence is the signal. We're here, and we can respond. Defense is the posture. Protect U.S. forces, protect bases, protect key routes, reduce vulnerability. Options are the real reason. Commanders want tools ready so leadership can choose from multiple actions without being forced into the worst one. Because here's the thing you only learn if you've watched enough of these cycles. The most dangerous moment is when leaders feel boxed in. Deployments are one way to widen the box. So when a headline says Iran in panic, the adult translation is this: the U.S. is increasing readiness and flexibility in a region where threats are real, time windows are short, and miscalculation risk is high. Now, what does this mean for Iran? Does it mean Iran is finished? No. Does it mean Iran is unaffected? Also no. It means the pressure environment is changing, and pressure changes behavior. Now, let me give you the simplest framework you can use to judge whether this is routine posture or a step change. Watch 3 signals. Signal 1, official objective language. Not vibes, not thumbnails, not sources say accounts. Official objective language. If you start hearing consistent, credible reporting that objectives are widening, beyond defending shipping and forces, then posture could be supporting a new phase. If the messaging stays focused on deterrence, defense, and maritime security, then deployments are more likely about protection and leverage, not an imminent new invasion. Signal 2, movement scale and sustainment. One ship and a MEU is serious, but it's also a standard tool in the U.S. kit. A true step change shows up in scale you can't hide: large additional air wings, multiple major naval movements, sustained logistics surges, visible reinforcement across several countries at once. Signal 3, the pattern of contact. If you see repeated attacks on U.S. assets, repeated clashes at sea, repeated high-casualty incidents, then readiness moves can shift quickly from defensive posture to active operations. It's the pattern that matters, not one headline. Now here's the part most people miss. In 2026-style conflict environments, the biggest threat isn't always a planned, deliberate escalation. It's miscalculation. Miscalculation is what happens when systems and humans are forced to make fast decisions with imperfect information. Crowded skies, crowded seas, multiple actors, short timelines. This is why amphibious groups matter. They don't just bring force. They bring response flexibility. They can support evacuations. They can secure key facilities. They can operate in a wide range of intensity without immediately jumping to the most escalatory option. Now, let's talk about what this means for the V-22 angle in human terms. The Osprey is not a war starts now symbol. It's a mobility symbol. It's how you move people and equipment quickly from ship to shore and across distance. So if you want to interpret Ospreys headed to the Middle East responsibly, the best interpretation is the U.S. is positioning rapid response mobility. That can be for force protection. That can be for contingency response. That can be for non-combatant evacuation operations. That can be for reinforcing bases. And yes, it can be for raids or offensive missions if escalation expands. But the aircraft's existence doesn't tell you which of those is happening next. That's why the panic framing is so manipulative. It tries to turn multi-purpose readiness into one single dramatic storyline. Now, I promised you the one mistake people make in moments like this, and I'll give it to you early. The mistake is confusing posture with intent. Posture is what you do so you're ready. Intent is what you do to change the situation. A deployment can be intense posture without being a locked intent. And the internet tries to collapse those two so you feel like everything is inevitable. It's not. Now, let's go one level deeper and talk about why these marine deployments are showing up now in particular. Because this isn't random. Recent reporting has put the Strait of Hormuz back at the center of the story. Disruptions, threats, and pressure around maritime movement. When Hormuz becomes a live question, maritime forces become the first lever, because that's where pressure can be applied and relieved without immediately turning it into a land war. And that's why amphibious ships and MEUs are such a common response. They're a flexible lever in a maritime-centric crisis. So instead of letting a headline tell you Iran panics, ask the more useful question. What problem is this deployment trying to solve? Most likely, protecting U.S. forces, keeping response options open, and signaling that maritime disruption has consequences. Now let's talk about what happens next, because long videos only work if you give people a map. There are 3 realistic paths from here. Path 1. Posture hardening, limited escalation. In this path, the U.S. moves forces, tightens defense, supports maritime security, and stays calibrated. Iran and aligned actors keep pressure up, but both sides avoid the kind of mass casualty event that forces an uncontrollable spiral. This is the tense but managed path. Path 2. Asymmetric contact increases. In this path, you see more attacks on regional assets, more attempts to pressure bases and shipping, more incidents that don't look like big battles but create constant friction. This is the path where deployments like MEUs become even more valuable, because response needs to be fast, flexible, and repeatable. Path 3. Miscalculation spiral. This is the nightmare path, and it doesn't require anyone to want total war. It requires one major mistake, one misidentified target, one high-casualty strike, one escalation that triggers political pressure to respond harder than planned. And the more crowded and fast the environment becomes, the more this risk grows. That's why posture moves matter, even when they don't guarantee intent. Now, quick recap so your brain can breathe. Credible reporting supports that additional Marines and warships are moving toward the Middle East as part of an amphibious group and Marine Expeditionary Unit package. The 3,000 Marines and dozens of Ospreys framing is likely a simplified, dramatized version of a more complex force package with numbers that are not always presented consistently in reputable reporting. And Iran in panic is a narrative label, not a verified fact. So if you want to track reality, ignore the vibe and watch the 3 signals: objective language, movement scale, and the pattern of contact. Now I want your take, but I want it framed like an adult. Do you think this is primarily deterrence and force protection? Or do you think it signals the U.S. is preparing for a broader phase? And which signal would convince you first? A shift in official objectives, a visible surge in forces beyond the MEU package, or repeated attacks that force a faster response cycle? Drop your answer in the comments. Sources: The Wall Street Journal live coverage on deploying an amphibious ready group and Marine Expeditionary Unit toward the Middle East, including the USS Tripoli and force size clarification.